as I said, good afternoon. My name's Susan Epsworth. I'm a Community Learning Development Officer with Education Scotland, and I cover the Tayside area. So I'm part of the Tayside Regional Improvement Team, and I'm joined by some colleagues from Education Scotland, Beverly Ferguson and Susan Docherty. Some of you will have been to our first session in these Tayside Family Learning webinars, and Beverly and Susan delivered that for us. They are National Officers for Parental Engagement and Family Learning, so thanks to them for joining us again. And there's a few other colleagues working away in the background to help me out and post links and keep an eye on the chat pane. Throughout this, feel free to use the chat pane just to ask any questions that you might have, either for myself or colleagues or our presenter. And also if you just want to make any comments or there's any resources or links that you want to share in the chat pane, then please feel free to use it for that. Trying to make this quite an informal session, so questions are welcomed, and we've got a fair bit of time. You'll see that I've built in some time for kind of reflection and to hear from each other. If you want to share any of your practice or share any of your experiences, that would be fantastic. So the first thing I'm going to do is kick off with a question. What do effective partnerships mean to you? And hopefully my colleague Julie is going to put in the chat pane the link to this Jamboard, and I'll just give people a few minutes to access that. If anybody is coming in today from a phone or from a device that just doesn't work for this, then please feel free just to put any answers to this question in the chat and we can add them to the Jamboard for you. For those of you who haven't used the Jamboard before, it kind of works like a virtual flip chart and post-its. So when you go into that, you'll see an example that I've popped in there, and down the left-hand side, there's an icon underneath the cursor one, which works like a virtual post-it note. So this is our first question. We're just going to spend a couple of minutes just having a wee bit of a think about this. And in a minute, I'll share the screen and we'll see what people are jotting down there. So you should hopefully be able to see the Jamboard. Julie, can you see that on the screen?
Yeah, that's good, Susan.
Brilliant. So you'll see just as people are adding in post-its there, what we're all thinking. So I'll just give us a minute or two to have a further think about that. And as I say, put anything in the chat pane if you can't access the Jamboard for any reason. That's great to see so many positive things up there around support, being supportive, respect for each other's role, shared goals and shared understandings, common goals. So that's one that's quite common up there. Working together with a shared vision, trust and honesty, agreed shared goals again, and shared values, working together in order to improve outcomes for learners. So what I'll do for the next 45-50 minutes, that Jamboard link will remain open. We'll have a second question that we'll do at the end of the session, but please feel free just to continue to put anything in there, and hopefully I think I can download this as a PDF afterwards and share this with you as well, but just continue to pop any thoughts around what effective partnerships mean to you in there. That would be great, thank you. And for the moment, hopefully, if technology works, I'll go back to my slides. Okey-doke. Is that all working okay, Julie?
Yeah, that's it. It's your values slide that's on.
Thank you. Sorry, folks, it's really difficult because I don't have any, I can't see any of your faces and I can't see any feedback, but I'm trusting this is all working fine. So, as I said, this webinar is all about effective partnerships. Some of you will have been at our first session of the Tayside Family Learning webinars, and that was a bit of an introduction to family learning and parental engagement. As I said at the beginning, I'm a Community Learning Development, otherwise known as CLD officer with Education Scotland. So this is coming from a CLD perspective, but I'm aware, you know, there's a wide variety of partnerships out there. Some of you may be working with CLD services, or some of you may be working with partnerships that are delivered using CLD approaches, and I'll go on to say a wee bit more about that. But what I've got up on the screen here is the values of community learning and development, and these are values that have been identified by the Cld Standards Council, which is the professional body for those who work or volunteer in the CLD sector. And I'm sure that these values ring home for all of us on the call today. And if we think about family learning and parental engagement, working with families, working with children and young people, particularly for me, it's the one around inclusion, valuing equality of opportunity and outcome, empowerment. I know sometimes that can be a bit of a sticky word, but when we're thinking about working with individuals and groups to influence issues that affect them and their communities through individual or collective action, and probably most importantly for this webinar, the working collaboratively value, that is something that is really a foundation to working in CLD, because it will go on to talk about CLD as such a wide-ranging sector, and that includes collaborative work with participants, with learners, communities, the partners that we work with, which as I said is really wide-ranging, and yeah, anybody really that we come into contact with. Now, as I said, I am joined by lots of colleagues today. I'm in no means an expert on this subject, and I'm sure even Susan, who's our National Officer in Family Learning, wouldn't say that she knows everything. So, you know, we're all in this together. As I said, this is a really informal session, so please bring your comments to the chat, or even stick your hand up if there's a burning question or a burning comment to make. And CLD is very much a values-based profession with its roots in social justice, which I'll go on to say a wee bit more about again. And just in case there's anyone who doesn't really know, CLD as a profession covers youth work, adult learning, including adult literacies, family learning, ESOL, wider community-based adult learning, and community development, community capacity building, community empowerment, and everything that's part of that. And the sector uses a range of formal and informal methods of learning and social development with individuals and groups. And CLD programmes are usually developed in dialogue with participants where possible, focusing on those excluded from participation, and really enables people to identify their own goals and engage in learning and take action to bring about change for themselves and for their community. As I said, social justice is really embedded in the world of CLD, and I'm sure many of you will have seen this image before. I think certainly up until maybe last year, I'd only seen the two pictures on the left, the equality and equity images, and was really pleased to see, this is from Dundee Science Centre, but really pleased to see when the third one popped up. And CLD's aim is very much to remove that fence altogether. And as I said, we do this by working alongside individuals and building capacity for them to do this very much themselves. CLD uses a social practice model rather than using a deficit model of learning, and not kind of deciding what learning people should get. and that idea of people not being empty vessels to be filled with our knowledge, but starting where the skills are already there. So when we're talking about family learning, what are the skills, say, amongst the parents and carers in the group? What are the skills of the children and young people? And how can we include them in the dialogue around what learning they want to be involved in and the impact and journey that this can progress them on? And really it's about kind of scaffolding the learning, supporting them to raise up and just as gently remove the scaffolding when they achieve their goals, but ensuring that the appropriate support and or signposting is there so that it's sustainable. I mentioned the Cld Standards Council. So this comes from them. This is the kind of Cld competencies in Scotland. And I'm just going to pick up on that, the top left-hand side, the phrase a diverse workforce. And I'm sure that whether you work in CLD or work with CLD, you really understand just how true this is. I think I've had about 15 different job titles in not that long a career. The family learning framework that I think Beverly and Susan introduced in session 1, and I think Julie's going to pop that link in the chat for you. It illustrates just some of the job profiles in the family learning field, and it's really interesting just to kind of get your head around, well, this might be my job role, but what does that job role, what's the title look like in a different area in Scotland? And it's quite mind-boggling how many different job titles there are. So these competencies are not necessarily new or unique areas of practice relating to family learning. However, they're key areas to think about, and I'm going to go on and have a think about 3 of them through a family learning lens. So the first one is all about know and understand the community in which we work. So whatever setting you work in, whether you work in a school, whether you work in a community centre, in a third sector organisation, you're more than likely linked to a geographical area, or you may well be working nationally, but with a specific group of people. And just having a think about that context, that's really important to CLD practitioners. What does the community look like that you work in and work with? Is it built up or rural? Is it socially isolated, or does it actually have great transport links? We know that links to poverty, and rural poverty is a really big thing for some areas. What is the housing like? Is it council housing? Is it privately occupied, rented? Is it a mix of all of this? What do the SIMD stats look like? And I'm sure for a lot of you, this is really, really key, and your bread and butter, and you think about this every day. But it's just bringing back to that kind of understanding what the community, the school community, the community that you're linked in with, what does that really look like? What are the different individuals and the different groups that make up that community? What are the key links? I've got a bullet point in there about key links to policies, such as making maths count, STEM and inclusion. For those of you who are either working in schools or are linked to schools, where does that come into it? What individuals and groups are kind of involved in those things, thinking about STEM and the links with gender equality? How are we making sure that people have access to the opportunities through those policies? And how is the work being recorded? There'll be what we might think of as more formal family learning programmes, and then there'll be some more informal family learning programmes. How is that being recorded? How is that kind of whole community approach to family learning being recorded? Particularly, again, for those of you in schools, if the work is happening outside of the school but has an impact on the families of your school, how is that being recorded? And I know from experience that's a really tricky thing to do. And you get into conversations about sharing data and sharing information, and it's not an easy one, but I think it's a really, really important one so that everybody's on the same page. And the image just down on the right-hand side, that comes from a recent What Scotland Learned paper that Education Scotland published, which we'll see a wee bit more about in a minute, but that's just a little sketch note that colleagues came together. That was kind of the main points that came out of our What Scotland Learned case studies around the importance of community. So there's just some things there about working relationships have been strengthened and the significance of the wider community. And really what's happened through COVID is there's been a real kind of collective urgency to work together at pace, and maybe where that red tape and bureaucracy existed before, it hasn't over the past. I was thinking where we are right now, we're probably about 13, 14 months it feels like, although I'm still back in March 2020 in my head. The second competency I'm going to touch on is the idea of develop and support collaborative working. So again, we've touched already on how important that is. Do you know your partners or your potential partners? Again, depending on the community that you're working in, your group, your organisation, your school will directly link to a whole range of organisations. And I mean, I've got some bullet points here of just a few. You will be linking with anything from welfare rights to community learning development adult learning groups, to gardening groups, to organisations where you might be signposting families, voluntary organisations such as Bernardo's, when you're thinking about family learning. So there's so many out there, and I think that's something that people can struggle with, is actually you don't know what you don't know, and it's quite difficult to map all the different organisations that we can be working with. Colleges is something that as a formal organisation can offer real progression in terms of the adults taking part in family learning, and just having a think of, well, how well linked in with that are we, you know, at the end of the family learning? Is there opportunities for progression in terms of that kind of thing? And is there further opportunities to work together? You know, what other family learning practitioners are in your area? Is it appropriate to work together? There could be, you know, kind of similar groups happening. Would that work not better, but would that be able to run together so that there's kind of two heads are better than one, and perhaps engage more families? And really overall, how are we kind of breaking down barriers to families engaging in family learning, and then enhancing that kind of community integration and the community engagement links? So I know that there's lots in there, and I'm aware that I'm kind of skipping over lots of information, but I want to get to our presenter who'll give you a real life example. Excuse me. And lastly, just before we move on to a local example, build and maintain relationships with individuals and groups. So that's, again, kind of part of collaborative working. But I'm sure for many of you, and certainly ask any community learning development practitioner, and they'll say it's all about relationships. I think I'm really bad for saying that all the time, but I genuinely mean it. It's about the relationship between staff, the relationships with families, the relationships with the parents and the adults in those families, with the family as a whole, with the siblings. It genuinely is all about relationships, and who has that relationship with the family. I think for some of us, it might not always be us. It might be somebody working in the community. It might be somebody in the nursery. If you're in a school, it might be an early years practitioner. It might be a youth worker who works with an older sibling. And I think it's really important to have a think about, well, who is the best person to engage with that family, whether it's around parental engagement or family learning, and then kind of work together to make sure that everyone's on the same page and that the best outcomes can be met at the other side. It's been really, really interesting to hear how relationships have strengthened over the last 12 to 14 months. I think for some schools certainly are telling us at Education Scotland that relationships with some families have become more positive, and they've actually felt some families have engaged who might not have before, because they don't have that physical barrier of stepping over the school gate, if you like. They're actually quite comfortable to engage in things online, and that's something that Jane will pick up on in a minute. And some practitioners have continued doorstep visits where that's been allowed. And, you know, that continued kind of relationship, particularly at that time when restrictions were so tight, was that relationship continued through daily check-ins on the phone, by email, or by these doorstep visits, as I say, when restrictions slightly loosened. And are we making the most of those relationships, whoever that person is who has that relationship with the families? So I'm aware that I've talked kind of at you for a good 10-15 minutes there. I'm going to move on now to Jane Allen. So Jane is a school and family development worker in Dundee in Ardler Primary School, and she's going to go on to talk a wee bit about her role and how they have adapted the family learning programmes in their school through COVID. And Jane, just let me know when you need me to go on to the next slide.
Okay, hi, I'm Jane Allen. I'm a school and family development worker based at Ardler Primary School in Dundee. School and family development workers have been in post since September 2013, and we focus on early intervention and prevention. We create links between primary schools and communities and families. We do things like group work, parent groups, things that are focused on health and well-being, one-to-one support on things like anger and loss and behaviour, if there's a family breakup. We support with attendance. We work year-round, so we provide holiday provision, which I'm going to go on to a bit more later, because that's changed a little bit with COVID, just the way we deliver it. We signpost to other agencies by identifying appropriate support with partner agencies to meet the needs of the family. Each school in Dundee has a school and family development worker which is based in the school, it's great because families can easily access them. They're a familiar face in the school, and that breaks down a few of the barriers. So on the slide, there are some other things that I'm involved in. Could you move on to the next slide, please, Susan? So we work with key partners, for example, Homestar, NHS, Aberlour, Barnardo's, Children First, Dundee West Community Trust, Dundee United Community Trust, and this is great because we're able to signpost, we're able to work in partnership to deliver groups, which I'm going to go on to in the next slide. So we used to do family cooking groups before COVID. And we also used to do cooking groups just with parents. And we needed, when COVID hit, we needed to think about ways that we could still engage with families, but do it virtually. So the platform that we used was Microsoft Teams. We applied for funding through Dundee Baron. So we were awarded £500 for a 6-week cooking programme. We handed out 13 cooking bags per week. So it was on a Wednesday after school. So each child was handed a bag and it had the ingredients and the recipe that they needed to take part in the cooking group. They were all sent an invite on Microsoft Teams. All the meals were cost effective and they were also on the NHS website. So they followed the healthy eating guidelines. Next slide, please. So I've got a little video here. So every week we would make, as well as being on Microsoft Teams, we would also make a little video. So families that chose not to log on to Teams or they couldn't access it, they were still able to see this little video and they were still able to participate in the learning. Could you play the video, please?
You should have all your ingredients at home with you, so you should have pizza bases. My pizza bases are actually broken, but I've got some new pizza bases. We have got Microsoft Teams set up here. We are using Microsoft Teams due to COVID restrictions, so families will log on to Microsoft Teams and they will cook along tonight.
Chopped in the middle. Yeah, we chopped in the middle. You hear that?
So to be safe, you use your claw grip on your vegetables.
There are lines. Okay, so I use these as a little guide for when we are cutting our onion because it makes it a little bit easier to keep it all together. And the reason why we've got this, slicing the onion round, and then we'll slice it across in this direction so that it slices it.
I like pineapple on my pizza.
Fingers for each person. So the portion will be slightly different for a child than it will be for an adult.
Today. Does anybody know?
Five.
Yeah, so every week I uploaded a video on Twitter, and I also emailed it out to the families that received the bags with the ingredients in. I found that the group, a lot of people that participated in the group, they wouldn't have normally participated in groups like that before, because I found that it was coming over the school door that was a bit of a barrier to them. So the fact that they didn't actually have to come in to do the group, I think more people participated. We worked in partnership. Two of the partners that we worked with were Tam McCabe from Dundee Community Trust. He has a kitchen at the football pitch, which we were able to use. So I did all the cooking and logged onto Microsoft Teams there. And we've made a little video of him, just giving a wee bit of background. Could you play the video, please, Susan?
Over the last 8 to 10 weeks, Dundee West Community Trust have partnered up with Ardler Primary School to look at how we can engage with families, to look at educating them around healthy eating and having healthy lifestyles. And it's been a huge passion for Dundee West, because with our objectives as a trust, looking at increasing participation, offering more opportunities for families and young people within our community to become more active and feel healthier, it's important that we offer that resource of eating properly and eating healthily. This family project that we ran over the last few while, we were delighted to facilitate. So we knew that Ardler Primary School were looking for somewhere to deliver this programme, and having a kitchen at our pavilion was perfect and allowed us to engage with families that perhaps we wouldn't have been able to reach out to before. So by using sport, we were able to work with Jane to help her cook the meals, but during that time of cooking the meals, we were able to educate families on the benefits of what each kind of food would provide. So rather than telling kids, you're ready to play football, you need lots of energy, go and eat a Mars bar or a chocolate bar, we were saying, having vegetables in your meals will give you that energy that will allow you to last longer and be able to, play at the highest level that you can. So that's been key. But again, talking about partnership working, we have hundreds of families in our community that play for Dundee West, and one example that again just goes to show the strong relationship between Dundee West and Ardler Primary School was that a couple of the families, and one in particular, the O'Connor family, we have the young kids that play for Dundee West, we have the mum who is a coach within the club. Now previously this family wouldn't have engaged with Ardler to be part of this programme, but the fact is because sport was connecting with the school, and the fact that these kids and families engaged with the club This broke the barrier down to allow the family to be like, this is something, we'll give it a shot. With no Tam, we're very passionate about sport and football. We're not too sure on the family cooking, but we'll give it a shot because we want to be part of this sports and school family project. The family's engaged. The family, the young children have started to realise that eating properly, eating well is going to support with being healthier, being active, and most importantly, being able to last longer in terms of playing the sport that they enjoy. Going forward, we want to now continue the partnership with Ardler. We want to try and reach out to more families. We want to try and highlight the importance of eating healthy, eating proper, and hopefully with our relationship and partnership working, we can expand the programme so it's not just about eating properly, it's about using the resource of the community trust to find ways to look at getting these families more active so that they're getting active and then being educated on how to eat properly. So yeah, that's where we want to get to in time.
Thank you, Pam. So I'm just going to talk a wee bit about the next steps, what we're planning on doing in terms of the family cooking group now. So I have been in talks with Dundee Barons, and Dundee Barons are really keen to roll this out across Dundee City. They are going to put together a proposal for a term time virtual cooking group fund, so schools and nurseries can apply for this. And then I'm going to provide some guidance and advice for other schools on how they can run this group and just how simple it is. I think probably the hardest part of the group is probably going out and buying all the things and making sure that you've got enough ingredients in each bag for each family. I went to Asda yesterday and got all the ingredients, and there was like 5 people behind me in the queue, so it was quite a big shop that I had to get. So it's good that it's going to be rolled out across the city, and Dundee Barons were really keen because they used to do the tea time cooking groups, and now they can't really do them because of COVID. So being able to do it virtually is really positive. Next slide, please. So one of our families that came along to the virtual cooking group, the girls have given a wee bit of feedback in a video. It was the children on a Wednesday are always really excited about the group. They will come up to me in the morning and ask where their cooking bag is, and they're always really excited to take it home and always excited to know what they're making next week, and it's really nice to see. So I'll just play this video.
Okay, so kids, what did you enjoy about our school cooking group?
I like making things and mixing the soup and putting the water out with sweet corn and the tuna.
Awesome.
And I like speaking again on the laptop. That's all.
Perfect. What about you, Rose? What did you like?
I liked working in teams with Mum, and I liked cutting carrots, and I liked making bolognese, and the thing we make today, I forgot what it's called, and like bolognese and pizza and soup, and speaking to my friends, and they're like George and stuff, and like Carla, who's my friend, and I'm finished.
And Kira, what about you? What did you like?
I liked making the bolognese and the pizza and the soup. And I liked working at home with Mum and the girls. I also liked about teams was like I got to stay in my jammies and I got to meet new people and speak to new people. And I think being on teams was good for other people in case they were late. They could just join and they don't need to worry about going rushing there and moving that.
Perfect. Thank you, girls.
Bye.
So some of the comments that we got back from families, it was all quite positive feedback, and because we were tweeting about it, we had families tweeting about it. So one of the parents had tweeted, someone has been having fun making chicken nuggets. So we made chicken nuggets one week, and we found that the children really enjoyed it, and they came into school and they talked about it. So some of the quotes were, "It's great, we have made recipes would not have usually tried to make. I loved it as we were all learning together. I would not have normally taken part in a group in school. However, this is easy to access." So this was quite a common comment from parents, that they don't have to actually get ready to go to the group, or they don't have to rush around really to get to the group, because it's just in the comfort of their own home. And the fact that they don't have to go and buy the ingredients. I remember the stresses my mum used to have of trying to get my stuff for HE, and I could only imagine what it would be like for families having to go out and buy all the things to participate in a cooking group. I loved that we could all get involved, so you could see in some of the video that the children were getting involved in chopping, and obviously this was supervised by parents, and they were involved in measuring, so literacy and numeracy, and there was lots and lots of learning involved. It will encourage me to take part in groups like this when they are allowed to be back on in school. So parents that have attended this group have actually said, "Oh, well, we might actually start coming to some groups in school when we're allowed to," so they're quite keen and quite excited for that. Can I have the next slide, please? So over COVID, we had to adapt practice. We couldn't do what we normally would have done in terms of family learning, so we kind of had to think outside the box, and it made us realise that the school was more than just a building. It was a community, and we all pulled together to try and deliver learning and to still engage with families. At the start of COVID, it was quite difficult because we were still learning. It was a big learning curve for all education staff of how do we deliver this learning. But as it kind of went on, we were able to do things like scavenger hunts in the local area where families could just participate on their own. It wouldn't have to be led. We did things like virtual Zumba, virtual book club. We had a family stay and play at Camperdown Park, where I invited classes down on certain days to meet each other. And this was recognised in the What Scotland Learned book, which was published back in December. And this book is fantastic for looking at, there's like 100 stories that you can look at, and it looks at practice all over Scotland. And it's been really useful to have a look through and see, well, what am I going to do next, and learning from what other local authorities have done. Next slide, please. So
I think that's you done, Jane.
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you
thanks
so
very
much. Thank you, Jane. I don't know, Beverly, Susan, is there anything in the chat? Because I can't see it.
Not yet.
Thank you. Feel free to put any questions you might have for Jane. Jane, I've got a couple of really quick ones that I know you'll be able to answer. You've mentioned them before. If a family didn't have a laptop or didn't have access to Teams, what did you do? And the other one is, are you going to continue classes the groups online, because you've said that there's some families that were happy to engage that way, which they might not come to the school?
So the first question with regards to children not being able to access it on Teams. So the children were given bags of the ingredients, and it had the recipe on it. So the children and families were still able to participate in the learning, regardless of whether they were able to access Teams or not. We've been quite good at Ardler because over COVID. I think a lot of schools have done the same, phoning up families and finding out whether they do have access or whether they don't have Wi-Fi, and trying to make sure that they have access. And we found that some families just choose not to go on Microsoft Teams, and that's totally fine. Like some of the families also as well, they don't like having their camera on, which is totally fine. Or some of them, they just like watching the video, or they'll maybe make it the following night. They won't make it that night because they've got something else on, so they're not being excluded because they're not able to access Microsoft Teams. Does that answer your question, Susan?
That's great, thank you. The other quick question was, are you going to continue doing them online?
So, for the next wee while, so for the next block, we're going to continue to do it online. I'm going to do some surveys with families to see whether they would prefer doing it online or whether they would prefer coming in. But I'm sure we would be able to do it online and families would be able to come in. I'm sure we'd be able to facilitate that when restrictions allow us to. So we would just have to see whether it would work or not. But I'm super keen to do it online still.
Thank you.
Susan, there's a comment in the chat pane. Maybe Andrina would like to come in and say a wee bit more.
Yes. Can you hear me okay? Yes.
Yes.
I was just listening to that and thinking, what a fantastic way of engaging with parents who, you know, I live and work in Dundee, and I know how difficult it is to engage some of our parents because the physical barrier of actually setting foot in the building is huge. So, you know, I think it's a real different way of doing things. Interestingly enough, at a secondary school level, we've done quite a lot of sessions, remote sessions for information sharing with parents, and we've had a far bigger turnout on them than we would have had had we offered them by parents coming into the school. So I just think it was such a wonderful video to watch and to see the difference it made. What I really like is that last slide that's still on the screen, which is, you know, focusing what you did, who you involved, the difference it made, and what you're going to do differently in the future. Because I think that's really the hub of it, isn't it? What's the difference that it made, and what are we going to do to keep that impact going? So yeah, I just think it was really good that you shared that with us, and a huge thank you for you. I do know the Ardler area, and I do know that it can be quite challenging to get parents to come in. So thank you.
Thank you.
Jane, I was just going to ask, it's just in relation to what will we do differently in the future, and some parents seem to have been increased engagement in other online platforms. Could you tell us a wee bit more about what else they've engaged in as a result of this?
So I found that parents that I have worked with as a result, so parents that have been involved in this cooking group, they're more than happy to phone me now and contact me and engage with me with other things. One of the families in particular, attendance and late coming has changed. It's improved, and I don't know whether it's a result of this or whether it's a result of the relationship that I've developed with this family. I'd be really, really keen to try and get families involved in other types of learning within the school, rather than just the family cooking. So things that would involve literacy and like read, write, ink and numeracy. So we're engaging with families in different ways as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jane. That was fantastic. Thanks for sharing. And that's a really, I think, really interesting point from Andrina and kind of what you're saying around actually for a lot of families there's been an increased engagement, and interesting to hear what's happening in secondary schools and that's having a knock-on effect in secondary schools with things like parent contact. It's great.
Susan, I've got something more to add as well. So with our next steps in terms of the cooking group, we're keen to involve more partners. So Dundee Barons have been in touch with Dundee and Angus College. So they could possibly work in partnership to deliver get the chefs to get involved with the cooking as well. So still have the school and family development workers involved to create that link. However, having somebody that is a bit more skilled in cooking than what I would be, and just so we're creating more links. So
that's brilliant. That's great. And I don't think you should put yourself down too much on your cooking skills. But thank you very much.
I don't know whether anybody noticed, but it was a bread knife we were using to cut the onions, and it was the only knife that we had that week. But it was, you just have to adapt, don't you? When you're working like this, you just have to use what you have, the tools that you have. So
exactly. No accidents, so that's good to hear. No, that was fantastic. Thanks very much. And Jane will be here for the next, till the end of the session. So just feel free if there's any questions that come to you, keep going. Just got a few more things to take us through because I want to have a bit of time at the end for another question on our Jamboard. So I just wanted to flag a couple of key documents, particularly for anybody who missed the introduction session that Beverly and Susan delivered. Although when we send out details after this, we'll try and include the slides from that session as well. But there's just a few documents there on the screen that are really important in the areas of family learning and parental engagement. And certainly from a partnerships perspective and a community learning and development perspective, the Adult Learning in Scotland Statement of Ambition 2014 is currently being updated as part of a new lifelong learning framework, which will encompass the adult learning, ESOL and the new youth work strategy. So just to flag a few. And a few others, you've got there the review of family learning, the Learning Together action plan, and in the middle there, a thematic inspection of family learning that was carried out by HMI colleagues that was published in February 2021, but was actually started pre-COVID. And then what colleagues did was go back to case studies to kind of find out how they've adapted things because of the pandemic. So people might find that quite a good read. And we'll share what we can in the chat, but we'll share these links afterwards as well. And just lastly, the family learning framework, which I mentioned earlier, and the toolkit for practitioners. Some really interesting things there if there's anything that people haven't come across before. And just lastly, before I ask the last question, I just wanted to kind of put a couple of quotes up on there. On the left-hand side, the recent Closing the Poverty-Related Attainment Gap report, and I just picked out this sentence about 90% of head teachers reported an increase in collaborative working with families and communities as a result of the work on closing the attainment gap. And that kind of focus on parental and family engagement, a few of us before we kind of started the call were saying actually it feels like there's a bit of momentum around this area, and we really hope that doesn't fall by the wayside because of those kind of strengthened relationships with families that we've touched on. And on the right-hand side, the What Scotland Learned that both Jane and I have mentioned, a couple of other quotes there from across Scotland talking about family learning being a really powerful method that when applied can be used to empower parents and encourage them to strengthen their role in their children's learning journey. And the Falkirk Summer Takeaway one, that was one that local schools worked with the CLD service to deliver some family learning, and a lot of that was around, making sure that families had access and coming back to those digital devices and the connectivity, because that was central to whether people were participating or not. So just for the last 5 minutes, I'm going to put up another Jamboard, and it's really just, I suppose, a bit of time to reflect. It's the same link as before, but at the top you just click the little arrow that goes to question 2. And we don't really have time to get into loads and loads of discussion, but as post-it notes will come up, maybe they'll spark some questions for people, or there might be things that come up that maybe Jane or some of my colleagues might have thoughts on how you could overcome those barriers. So we're just going to do that for the next few minutes before we finish up snappy for 5 p.m, because I know for lots of you it'll have been a really, really long day. And I'll share the Jamboard so we can see what people are putting in.
Susan, there's another comment in the chat pane from a Mrs. Brown, so I don't know if you want to pull her
Great.
in.
Mrs. Brown, sorry, I because we can't see first names, would you like to come in and expand on your comment?
Hi there. So it was really refreshing to see that they're doing this in primary school as well, because it gives a good foundation for us to work in high school. So we did something very similar. Where pre-COVID we would do it with lots of different subjects, mostly practical subjects in school. So we would do like a project with the technical department, the home economics department, the art department. We did some confidence building with the drama department as well. But post-COVID, we were mostly focusing on the home economics department, but we did a science programme, so I thought that might be quite good for the primary schools as well. So we just made up kits and sent them home with the instructions, and we used Google Classroom as our platform for communicating with the parents, so it was really good.
That's great, thank you. I don't know if anybody's on the call who made use of them, but I know that Dundee Science Centre were doing kind of science kits, and I think they were working with, I want to say, Bernardo's, and one way they were getting them out to people was if families were accessing food banks, they were then offered this kind of science family activity kit, which I thought was quite a great way of getting that out there as well. Science is such a great thing to get the whole family involved, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it was great. I think really good working between siblings as well, you know, and it was really, I think, in the second lockdown, particularly because the weather wasn't great and you couldn't maybe get out as much, it just provided another activity for them to do at home and keep people engaged.
Thank you.
No problem.
So just looking at some of the post-its, I like to think of these as virtual post-its. I wish we were in a room with the actual post-its. But people, saying in there about other school priorities, confused agendas, which is along the same lines. Competition, that's an interesting one. I don't know if people mean competition between different organisations or, that's an interesting one to think about. Hierarchical structures, parity of esteem. I think that's something that comes up quite a lot in partnership working if there's different partners involved. Miscommunication, knowing who's best to contact. Like I said, I think we could all do mapping exercises and then 2 weeks down the line they'd be out of date. So it's really hard to keep up to date with that information. Lots of schools contacting the same places, and of course the challenge of having to distance socially. So I just wanted to pose that question just really for a wee bit of reflection, and I'll leave that up there just while I pop up the last slide and make sure folk get away for 5 o'clock. Sorry, bear with me. So the last slide just basically shows how many examples of family learning there are on our National Improvement Hub. Susan and Beverly could probably talk to you all day about the different examples from family learning, parental engagement that are on there, and that's just a snapshot of them. As I say, we'll get these slides out and they'll have all these links on them. You see there at the bottom there are over 400 parental involvement, engagement and family learning case studies. So if people are quite keen to hear what's happening in other areas, then that's somewhere there that would be useful to go. And last but not leastly, of course, it wouldn't be an online session if we didn't ask you to do a quick evaluation. That'll be going in the chat, but I will send it out as well afterwards. And it really does just take a couple of minutes because we'd love to hear if this has been useful, and if something similar to this would be useful in the future, please give us your feedback. As I said, this is session 2 of our programme of family learning webinars for Tayside. Our next one is supporting literacy and numeracy at home, and I want to say the dates have completely gone out my head, but it is in May at some point where we can get that information. I'm sure some of you are already signed up. And the fourth session is around self-evaluation in family learning, parental engagement, and that will be led by one of our HMI colleagues. So hopefully both of those will be useful to you. And this session has been recorded, so we can get out the recording as well, and you can share that with colleagues. But my email's up on there. Feel free to get in touch, and if you would like to be put in touch with anybody else, either any of my colleagues or Jane, then I can do that for you as well.